Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janabalabha Giri Bharadari Iyasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Banachari Jairan Hamadhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parvatikacharya Tarasati Shri Śrimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavindra Ki Granth Śrimad Bhāgavatam Ki Samveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the Assembled Devotees. All glories to the Assembled Devotees. All glories to the Assembled Devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you very much. So today we are on Canto 3, Chapter 26, Text 30. Vayosta Sparsha Tanmatrad. It's not up there. Oh, okay. So will it, in a few minutes, okay, I'll just read through it, and if we're through it by the time that it comes on, then we'll just, oh, everybody has, of course, their handheld, lovable Qualcomm magic box. So, Vayosya Sparsha Tanmatrad Rupam Daiveritad Abhut Samuthitam Tatastejas Chakshurupo Palambanam Vayosya Sparsha Tanmatrad Rupam Daiveritad Abhut Samuthitam Tatastejas Chakshurupo Palambanam. Please chant. Vayosya Sparsha Tanmatrad Amritad Abhut Samuthitam Tatastejas Chakshurupa Palambanam. Vayosya Sparsha Tanmatrad Rupam Daiveritad Abhut Samuthitam Tatastejas Chakshurupa Palambanam. Vayosya Sparsha Tanmatrad Rupam Daiveritad Abhut Samuthitam Tatastejas Chakshurupa palambhanam. Vayoscha sparsha matra. Rupam daiveritad abhut. Samuthitam tatastejas. Chakshurupa palambanam. Vaishnavis? Almost ready. There we go. Vayoscha sparsha tanmatrad. Rupam daiveritad abhut. Samuthitam tatastejas. Chakshurupa palambhanam. Ayoscha sparsha tanmatra. Rupam daiveritad abhut. Samuthitam tatastejas. Chakshurupo palambanam. Vayo, from air. Cha, and. Sparshatan matrat, which evolves from the subtle element touch. Rupam, form. Daiva iritat, according to destiny. Abhut, evolved. Samuthitam, arose. Tataha, from that. Tejaha, fire. Chakshuhu, sense of sight. Rupa, color and form. Upalambhanam, perceiving. By the interactions of the air and the sensations of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. By evolution of such forms, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms in color. So we can responsibly read this. By interaction of the air and the sensations of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. By evolution of such forms, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms in color. So there's a short purport here. Because of destiny, the touch sensation, the interactions of air, and the situation of the mind, which is produced of the ethereal element, one receives a body according to his previous activities. Needless to say, a living entity transmigrates from one form to another. His form changes according to destiny and by arrangement of a superior authority which controls the interaction of air and the mental situation. Form is the combination of different types of sense perception. Predestined activities are the plans of the mental situation and the interaction of air. Vayosta sparsha tanmatrad rupam daiveritad abhut samuthitam tatastejash chakshurupo palambanam. By interactions of the air and the sensation of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. By evolution of such forms, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms in color. Oh, that's a very cryptic sounding verse here. But actually, what's being discussed is overall kind of simple in a very basic way. We are watching the various material elements, which are different from what the scientists consider the material elements. We're watching these various different elements interact with one another and produce further byproducts. So we go from things that are very subtle to things that are grosser. So we start off with very, very subtle things like mind and intelligence and false ego and modes of nature. These things cannot be seen or touched. They certainly exist, but they're not, as we use in English language, palpable, which means they can't be connected directly to by the senses. What we eventually get is a world that is palpable, that can be connected to by the senses. So Prabhupada doesn't say it there, but he alludes to a verse, Karmana Devi Netrina Jantur Deho Papataye Striyo Pravishta Udaram Pumsamreta Kanashrayaha, I believe is how it goes. It's 3:31:1. So, yeah, if you want, that would be good. So, Karmana Devi Netrena Jantur Deho Papataye Striyo Pravishta Udaram Pumsamreta Kanashraya, that according to the arrangement of the divine energy and the living entity is put into the womb of a woman with a particle of male semina. So that's teachings of Rishabdev, I believe. No, it's not the teachings of Rishabdev. What is that actually? It's more of this very same section about the Kapila Dev's teaching to Devahuti. It's part of that. It's actually an earlier version of what we're hearing today. So if you haven't noticed that this whole explanation of the Sankhya philosophy is stretched out over many chapters of the third canto. We heard about it early on, and we're hearing about it again. It's in many different chapters. And what we're learning is that the world that we live in is not what it appears to be. Looks like we are bodies, and we're walking around in a solid world, and the senses are giving us reliable information about that solid world. And the duty of the living entity is to discover what kinds of sense experiences are pleasant and what ones are not, and gradually develop a life plan which maximizes those pleasurable sense experiences and minimizes the unpleasant ones. That seems kind of like the naive first face of the material world. But that's not at all what's going on. Actually, the living entity is a spirit soul. He's not the body. He's incarcerated in the body. And what he gets through the senses is not reliable information about what's going on in the outside world. And planning a life based on what is pleasing to the senses is a total waste of time. And there's a larger thing going on, which we call samsara, the cycle of reincarnation, that the living entity is going from one body to another. So this idea of going from one body to another is something that is pretty much completely absent from the Western philosophical conception of things. Generally, in the Western world, only people and philosophies that have come from the Eastern world have any connection with this idea of reincarnation, that we haven't just suddenly popped into existence out of nothing, and we are living one life and then it's over and we either go to heaven or hell or whatever else. Some people who are atheistic just think that when it's over, completely over. So that's the way modern society thinks of what's our existential situation. The living entity is in a particular body today because of things that the living entity did in previous lives. We have this body, that one that you look at in the mirror every morning, that very body, one with the smiling face and all those quirks that you wish weren't there. That body has been gifted karmana deve netrena jantor deho papate strio pravishta udaram pumsamreta kanashraya. And we have the English translation there. Under the supervision of the Supreme Lord and according to the results of his work, the living entity, the soul, is made to enter the womb of a woman through the particle of male semen to assume a particular type of body. So right now, we are creating our future body. And there's a whole system, and this is kind of what we're talking about here. Has to do with demigods, particularly Yamaraj. It has to do with life heirs. We learn that the heirs of the body are what connects the mental thinking to the bodily functions. We have senses. We've read that there are 5 working senses and 5 knowledge-acquiring senses. And through manipulation of life heirs, those senses are brought to bear, either taking in information or acting in the external world. And we learn that according to the way we work, we get a future even before we take another birth. We are right now creating our future by what we do, what we think. And so this is not so terrifying if one is stumbling through trying to process Krishna consciousness. Even if we do it imperfectly, even if we do it intermittently, we are still protected by the Supreme Lord, and we will be gradually purifying ourselves. And we will, all this mysterious stuff about 5 knowledge-acquiring senses, 5 working senses, 5 gross sense objects, 5 subtle sense objects, mind, intelligence, false ego, contaminated consciousness, time factor, and the super soul, all these things that are part of Sankhya philosophy, will begin to fall into place. We're reading about them and they sound confusing to us, generally speaking. But that's because our consciousness is not very clear. If you were on a merry-go-round and it was spinning and you were trying to read a sign that was on the wall, as you spun by, you could try to catch what the sign was saying on the wall. But you're spinning, so it's very hard for you to see what's on the wall. Similarly, not only that, but there were dark spots and light spots where you could see some things and you couldn't see others. And not only that, but there was a projector that was projecting flashing images on the wall. You can see what a confusing scene that would be. So the process of Krishna consciousness gradually stops the merry-go-round, turns off the projectors, turns on the lights, and actually along with the merry-go-round, the projector, and the dark and light spots, there is a whirlwind going on. So there's dust particles flying around. So all that stops. If we could just be, and the senses were still, we could simply perceive the way things actually are. But that's not what happens, because the modes of nature are too active in our bodies. So we hear about these things and they sound very mysterious. But it doesn't matter whether we understand them very distinctly or not. At least we come away with the overall understanding that this body is not ultimately real. It appears to be us, but it is not. We are not the body, we are within a body. And not only are we within the body, there's all this other structure in there. Life airs, senses, the mind, desires, the super soul. And so that mysterious world within that nobody ever talks about in the Western world, maybe psychologists a little bit, you know. But they don't have a very complete understanding of what's going on in there. That mysterious inner world, that world, we don't find out anything about in the Western philosophical zeitgeist. You know, we are completely unaware of it. But actually, this is what we're hearing in Kapila's explanation to his mother, Devahuti, is this map. And we understand that there's so many mysterious things in there, these mysterious elements that work on each other. And we learn that the material energy goes from subtle to gross. So we're hearing here the unfolding. This is the Pancha Mahabhuta. So we're hearing the unfolding of the false ego in the mode of ignorance. And so the false ego in the mode of ignorance is generating, first of all, we hear about sound, and from sound comes ether and the organ of hearing. Then we have touch generating touch generating air, and the organ of feeling. Then we have form generating fire, and the organ of seeing, and taste generating water, and of course the tongue. And finally we have odor, and it generates earth, and the organ of taste, or organ of rather smell. So these tanmatras alternating with the actual gross matter elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, are gradually generated. And of course, earth is the most solid and the most palpable. And ether is the least solid and the least palpable. And these elements that constitute our world are tied up and convoluted in with these various sense perceptions, touch, form, taste, smell, and which one did I leave out? Touch, form, taste, smell, and sound. So these are the various experiences. So life is an experience. We are inside of it. This is something that the scientists have no explanation for. What do we mean by experience? You know, we can talk about how photons come into the eyeball and how they hit the back of the retina and how they go into the optic nerve and how they're processed in various parts of the brain. We can talk about that. But nowhere in that explanation do we have the concept of experience. We're experiencing light. That's very different. We can describe the same thing with the television set. You have a camera, and it has some kind of scanning array of sensors, and those scanning pixel arrays turn those pixels into an array of ones and zeros, and then those ones and zeros, they go into a wire, or they're transmitted through the air, and they go to another, like an image screen, like this one here, flat screen, and then they're transferred back into images that light up pixels and make different colors. The question is, who's watching the movie? So in the scientific explanation, we know about how the pixels are excited and how they're stored, and the electronics of the various scanning schematics and things like that, and how a picture is taken apart and then put back together. But then who's watching the movie? That's what we don't hear about at all. So this is the experience of life. And so with spiritual life, we need to, recognize that by trying to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we gradually come out and recognize it's a movie. At the time of death, that will be 100% clear, that we thought we were so-and-so, we thought we owned such and such, we thought we looked like this and this, and we thought we lived there and there, but none of those were true, because now we are on to somewhere else. At the time of death, that will be one very, very clear thing. So what we're trying to do now is recognize that before we get to the point of death, so that we can live a life that's based on the reality of the fact that we're not the body. We're in a body. We have material desires, but those material desires are not us. They are just bad habits left over from thousands of lifetimes. And by working at reconnecting the senses to service to Krishna again and again and again, then gradually those bad habits fade. Those desires become things that we remember we once had that are not so influential anymore. And in this way, we are gradually destroying the possibility that another body is being created for us somewhere right now. That's what the cycle of reincarnation is doing, what the samsara cycle is doing. Right now, we are creating a new body. But if we're engaged in devotional service, we are not creating a new body. We are simply continuing our lives after we leave this body and we go to the spiritual world. But if we're not completely pure, then we might take another birth or two so we can finish up the process. But in any case, we are on our way out of the material world. Everyone else is not on their way out. Everyone else is ready to do another go-around of the cycle of birth and death. And that's what Kapila is trying to explain to his mother, that by engaging in devotional service, one will not habitually, perpetually, redundantly take birth again and again in different forms of bodies in different places, all the time imagining the body is real, all the time imagining its desires are important, all the time thinking that what it's experiencing is happiness and distress, and trying to maximize that happiness. So the material energy is subtle, it's complex, and as we heard earlier, the Supreme keeps himself within his supersoul and outside as a time factor. So the time factor is agitating things and moving things around. We are as if in a virtual reality. The things that we see, the people we meet, the things that happen to us are not accidents. They're all directly designed by the Supreme for our benefit in some kind of way or another. If we can understand what it is, the message that we're supposed to get, then we can cooperate with the Supreme. But we have to understand what the message is. And that's why we have Śrimad Bhāgavatam and Bhagavad Gita. We begin to decode that message of what it is that the Supreme is trying to tell us by the time factor. He's like one of our cooks stirring a big pot of khichdi with a giant paddle. So he's stirring the pot, and the khichdi is swishing around in the pot. And that's what's happening to us. And inside, there is the Supersoul. And the Supersoul is whispering to us what we should be doing. And we're saying, I don't know. I don't think so. I'm not sure about that. So we are so practiced at ignoring the Supersoul that whenever it talks to us, we usually do the other thing. We do the opposite thing. But if we continue in Krishna consciousness, gradually we will find ourselves hearing the Supersoul more clearly and doing the right thing more often. And that way, when the time factor puts interesting arrays of situations in front of our body by agitating the time factor, then we will know how properly to respond. So that's part of this whole system. So Krishna is the time factor, and he is known, as we heard, as Kala Chakra, or sometimes the chakra. He is the chakra of time. And that time factor diminishes everybody's life. It takes apart our bodies. It creates ever new, novel situations which we have to adapt to in some way or another. And this is what spiritual life is about, is to learn how to be internally connected and real about how we're interacting with the outside world, how we're interacting with others, and how we are thinking about, I am not here in this life just to maximize pleasurable sense experiences. I'm here to try to learn what it is Krishna is teaching me at this moment, and to try to come in contact with that. Maybe I'm doing it imperfectly, maybe I'm doing it intermittently, but if I continue doing it, I will get better at it. All right, so I'm going to stop there. Any questions or comments? Do we have a microphone? Do we still do that these days? Yes, we have. Hadai has a question in the back.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the class. I had a question about kind of the overall structure of this section of Bhagavatam. It seems that in 3rd canto, 25th chapter, Kapila Muni is speaking about pure devotional service. There's those 8 verses, 3, 25, 25, these beautiful verses. Then he seems to be speaking about like the material world and sometimes Sankhya philosophy and how the world is split. It seems kind of counter. You speak about such a high topic in devotional service, then you start talking about the world. and kind of how to see it. It seems a little bit counterintuitive. It's reminding me of, yeah, but I was just wondering, why is Kapila doing this?
Why he's bouncing back and forth between explanations of the devotional service and explanations of mundane view of the material world. Well, in Ishopanishad, I believe it is, we hear that one has to learn knowledge and nescience side by side. You know, that the best way is kind of a negative and a positive approach. We learn what's the right thing and we learn what's the wrong thing by learning what the products are or the effects will be of doing the right thing, and then we also learn what the effects will be of doing the wrong thing. And if you have a wrong conception of the situation, then you are going to make wrong assumptions about the situation, and you're going to act in a way that will eventually bump your head against the wall, because you think things are some way other than the way that they actually are. So that's what we mean when we're saying that one understands the truth. One understands how to act in such a way that you're never surprised by some completely unexpected thing, nor are you going to run off the edge of a cliff or anything like that, because you see things the way they are. However, if you misconceive things, then you could run off the edge of a cliff or bump into a wall or create some really undesirable situation for yourself. So, in one way, we're learning what the proper thing is, but we're also seeing these case histories and explanations of how people generally think, so we understand why many people think the wrong way and what will ultimately happen to people who think the wrong way. So we're learning, nescience and knowledge side by side. We're learning them together. Sometimes spiritual life is kind of described in a gradual progression, like, for instance, the what am I thinking of? The nectar of instruction, where we start off with very, very basic things about spiritual life, how one should view things, and we wind up starting to talk about Krishna and Radha, and we talk about Radha Kund, and finally, all these very high things, So in some cases, we do make a progression from more and more mundane views that would be important and relevant to people who are not very advanced in spiritual life, all the way up to the most esoteric and very high subject matters about which only people who have very, very developed, connection with the Supreme Lord could relate to. So sometimes it moves like that, but other times it generally tends to bounce back and forth. It seems like that's kind of what Krishna does with Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. Sometimes he's talking about, wrong conceptions, sometimes he's talking about right conceptions. But other times we get a sort of a progression with a gradual sweep upward into a more esoteric, more, what's the right word for it? More devotionally oriented, or a more specialized or rasic understanding of things, which is only relevant for people who are very advanced. So most of us are not so advanced, And we see how much of the Bhāgavatam there is before one gets to the 10th canto. The 10th canto is really, in one sense, the ultimate purpose of the Bhāgavatam. And it's quite large, has 90-some chapters in it, so it's, I think, all the way close to a fifth or a fourth of the entire mass of the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, so it's a big section. But before we get there, we get all these details about how the material world works and what our place is in it, and people who did the right thing, people who did the wrong thing. And then by the time we get to the 10th canto, then we are ready to understand that 10th canto in a very, very probably a good word would be a very level-headed way, a very fully aware way, rather than just thinking it's either hyperbole or imagining it's some kind of mythology or something like that, because we have been grounded in the reality that gradually builds us up to being able to accept and understand those kind of high subject matters. Okay. Well, by the way, as we all know, today is the Tirobhav, or disappearance of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swāmī Prabhupada. So later, of course, there will be, people giving their offerings, and there'll be Pushpanjali and other things in the evening, I think, here. And we are doing a small program at 26 2nd Avenue. If any of you want to make the pilgrimage there, we'll open at 6 and close at 8. So people are into shopping around or hopping from one temple to another during a day like this, then they can be welcome there. There will be a program, of course, here, and there'll be a program at the Bhakti Center. But we decided also to try to do a small program at 26 2nd Avenue for anyone who wanted to go there and get an opportunity to be where Prabhupada originally started the Hare Krishna movement. So, okay, thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. All glories to the Sankirtan movement. And all glories to the holy name, which will deliver us ultimately from our own prison that we have created for ourselves. Hare Krishna.